Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Ahead, and let's get to the late breaking news out of college basketball, something that we have known was coming, frankly, for months, just became official moments ago. Kenny Payne, head coach, Louisville Cardinals. Louisville loses on the Tuesday of the ACC tournament. And just moments ago, Kenny Payne was officially fired as the Louisville head coach. Never celebrate a man's demise, never celebrate a man losing his job. We've all been there in some way, shape, or form, but this is not surprising. We thought it might happen as early as Christmas. It did not, but it becomes official today with Louisville season over. I want to go ahead and talk about candidates in a minute, but listen, it goes without saying, two things about the Kenny Payne era are true. One, I thought it was going to work. And I was one of those guys, listen, I'm not going to hide from this. I'm not going to pretend that I said things that I didn't say or didn't say things that I did say. When the Kenny Payne hire happened, I thought it was actually a very good hire for Louisville. Now, admittedly, the last time that the job opened, I don't think the candidate pool was great. Louisville was still under NCAA investigation. And once at that time, you got past a Bruce Pearl, Nate Oates was never coming because of his buyout. Kenny Payne seemed like a great hire. I'm not going to hide from the fact that I said I thought it was a good hire at the time. Experienced in the Power Five, great recruiter. Players loved him from his time at Kentucky. They still rave about him in the NBA. The NBA guys, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, whoever, rave about Kenny Payne. They love him. But it was obviously very quick, very obvious, very quick that it simply was not going to work. I'll tell you a quick story. First of all, I had forgotten just how bad it started. I knew year one was not good. Duh. But I went back and looked. I forgot that they lost to Bellarmine on opening night, Wright State the next game, and started 0-9 overall. I knew it was bad. I'll tell you a true story. So year one was the 2022-2023 season. He coached his first game at Louisville Wednesday, November 9th of 2022. I remember being out in Vegas for an event that December. So November 9th was his coaching debut at Louisville. I remember being out in Vegas like December, probably early to mid-December, having dinner with an NBA exec. And he said, Aaron, listen, I like KP. That is the worst coach basketball team that I have ever seen. And it wasn't a knock. It was just a reality. And it never got better. They finished year one at 4-28 overall. They finish year two at 8-24 overall, meaning that as a whole, Kenny Payne finishes with a 12-52 record. And I think beyond just the wins and losses, which are unacceptable at a place like Louisville, it was all the chaos around the program. Remember, they had a player that they said was hitting the portal. The player says, I'm not leaving. Then he's sitting in the stands that night at a game. There was the player who didn't want to check in because he didn't have the right tights. That is a real story. If you don't believe me, look it up. Like tights that you would wear under your basketball shorts. There was the recruitment of Trenton Flowers, their top recruit, shows up on campus, goes through summer workouts, then bounces before the fall semester. Now, I don't blame all of that on Kenny Payne. I don't blame his top recruit bailing before he ever plays a game. But these were just signs that things were not going well, that things were not working well. And I think the disappointing thing about all of it is it's bad enough that the era did not go well. But what made it worse was Kenny Payne was a guy that really up until the end took zero accountability. I saw his final press conference. And in the press conference on Tuesday night, at the ACC tournament, he's asked about, his job. And he goes into this fight or flight mode of, I told you we were going to need 2 or 3 years. I told you it was going to take time. He said 3 or 4 years, excuse me. I told you it was going to take 3 or 4 years. I told you it was going to take time. And you all forgot about that. Listen, I get it. Everybody wants more time. Everybody thinks they have the answer. Everybody thinks that they can get the fix. When you're 12-52 at a school like Louisville, I'm sorry. There's no excuse. Listen to the losses that I mentioned earlier. Wright State, Bellarmine last year. This year they lost to DePaul. DePaul was 0-20 in the Big East this year. Louisville lost to him. Okay. And so there's no excuses. You can't be this bad. There's no, you have to be out. Listen, Billy Gillispie got fired at Kentucky after 2 years, and that guy actually made the NCAA tournament in year one. So if that's the standard at a program that expects national championships, then there's zero excuses. Louisville, listen, it has everything that you need to compete at the highest level. And here's the crazy part. Not only does it have all the resources, the money, the this, the that, the ACC is terrible right now. The ACC might be a 3-bid league this year. So if there's ever a window to win big, win quickly, it's now. It's also why I think one of many reasons that as we turn the page from Kenny Payne, I think it's probably the last time we ever talk about him on this show, to be honest. I think he maybe goes back to the NBA, takes an assistant's job, and kind of just rides it out till the end of retirement. I bring it up because I think this is a very desirable job. And I think unlike last time, there are legitimate candidates that want this job. Now, what's interesting is I think it's a little bit different in that over the last couple months, some of those great candidates don't look quite so great anymore. But this is a great job. I think the candidates are going to line up. There is no NCAA investigation. I think the program now is in a better place from like an NIL perspective. I think they fell a little bit behind there. Kenny Payne was trying to do the freshman thing. He came in and he said, I don't believe in NIL, which was another thing. It's like, dude, I know you left for a couple years, but this is an NIL world. You don't want to play with the big boys. It's just not going to work. So I bring it up because the job is open, and I think we are going to see some very interesting candidates with this job opportunity. By the way, I believe it's one of the 10 best jobs in college basketball. Again, every resource, every this, you play in an NBA arena. Louisville is the biggest college basketball market in the country. Now, Louisville fans, I know you want to hear it, but it's a lot of Kentucky fans that live in the region. But that is a place that guys will crawl over glass to coach because these guys all want to coach at a place that matters, where people care, where people love college basketball, where people are going to give you every advantage to succeed. And that's why I believe the job is going to be really good. Now, in terms of who might take it, we've done 2 or 3 of these updates, so I'll try to keep this one a little bit quicker. We'll also react to this a little bit more on our full show later. But a couple names stand out. The first one we just talked about last week. So Scott Drew is a name that Louisville fans have really wrapped their arms around. Head coach, Baylor. Now, there's differing reports. How interested is he really? It's worth noting, by the way, I think Josh Hurd, the AD, has done a very good job of keeping things close to the vest. I know people that cover the program that are like, we really don't know where he's thinking and what he's doing. He's keeping things really tight. Now, part of it is you can't get face-to-face with anybody until their seasons end. But the first name is Scott Drew. How realistic is it? I don't know. But I laid out why I think he's a legitimate candidate last week. This is a guy, he's in his mid-50s, he's at Baylor, and he won a national championship, and he just might ride it out. But I think the landscape has changed even since he won that title. You go back to that Baylor national championship. Jared Butler, Davion Mitchell, Maceo Teague, those guys, Davion Mitchell, Maceo Teague, they were redshirt transfers. And so I love Scott Drew, but he kind of found this little loophole where he knew he couldn't get the Kansas one and done, across the board talent. And so what he was doing was he was bringing in really good players, redshirting them, having them ready a year later. And that's just not something you can do anymore. And so they've been really good since the national championship, but they haven't really had an amazing season. And maybe it changes now and they go for a run in 2024. But you go to Louisville, you can recruit at the highest level, you can compete at the highest level. 2 factors that I think are important. One, I mentioned this the other day, and it really, I think, resonated with Louisville fans. Big 12's only getting harder. And I think Baylor is a team that you can argue is going to be hurt by the realigned Big 12 more than anybody. Because Baylor, probably in the Big 12 of even a year ago, that 10-team Big 12. Yeah, Texas has more resources. Yeah, Oklahoma's this. But in the grand scheme of things, those are schools you can compete with. Texas schools, this and that. Kansas is obviously on another level, but hey, you're probably going to be competing for number 2 behind Kansas. Well, you can still compete in that number 2, number 3 spot, but it's just going to get a lot tougher. I mentioned this the other day. Houston, as long as Kelvin Sampson's there, Houston's on like a 7-year run of being awesome. They are not taking a step back. That is a program that all of a sudden you have to contend with. Arizona is coming next year, which I think is an important variable in this as well. That's 3 programs right now that I believe are better suited this second to win at a high level than Baylor. And I think Kansas and Arizona, no matter who the coach is, are always going to be. Now, Houston, it's a Kelvin Sampson thing. We'll see what happens when he retires. But Iowa State is in a better place than they were. BYU, remember, Baylor lost at BYU a few weeks ago. This league is just so tough. And so if you can now go to the ACC where, okay, Duke's operating at a pretty high level. North Carolina's operating at a pretty high level. But Syracuse ain't great. Notre Dame ain't great. Georgia Tech ain't great. Wake Forest is good but not great. Pitt is good but not great. You can get to the top really fast. And I do think for all of these candidates, that's something they're looking at. I'll be really quick because I want to get to other candidates. But if you listen to my interview with Will Wade the other day, something really stood out. We were talking about how the net ranking favors power conference teams. And it was a nuanced conversation. But he literally said, in the NIL era, he said, like, what jobs are good? They're all good. He said they're all good. Because if you know how to raise a little bit of NIL money and you know what you're doing, the system is set up for you to succeed. You should be able to get to the tournament in year 1 at pretty much every Power 5 job. So I think it makes sense. And again, the ACC being down helps. Beyond Scott Drew, some other names. Name that I personally like, but I know it's a little hit or miss. Chris Beard. Listen, I know it's gone sideways at Ole Miss. Started 18-3. They're 20-11 entering the SEC tournament. But that guy wins everywhere he goes. And he might not make the NCAA tournament this year, but he'll probably make the NIT. Remember, year 2 at Texas Tech was when he really blew up, went to an Elite 8. Year 2 at Texas, he had them number 1 in the country. So this is a guy, sets the tone in year 1. Year 2 is when things blow up. And so to me, he's an elite coach. He's won everywhere, won at Little Rock, year 1, one at the D2 level, one at the JUCO level. But obviously there are complications with Chris Beard. One, we all know the legal situation from a year ago at Texas. I've gone over it. We don't need to relitigate all of the details, but the bottom line remains we know what happened. We know that charges were ultimately dropped, and that's why he got the Ole Miss job, and it's up to Ole Miss to determine whether they believe he deserves a second chance, and they gave him one. Doesn't mean that Louisville's going to feel the same way, and I do know that there are people in that market that would be opposed to Chris Beard as being the head coach. You know, the other thing is I think they've dipped a little bit. So if you don't make the NCAA tournament in year 1 and you do have a coach with kind of baggage, is that something that holds you back? I don't think it should personally, but I'm not the guy that has to go to boosters and say, hey, this is the guy that I want. Give me money to make it happen. Because some of those boosters might not be comfortable with it. Some might not care and say, just get me the best coach possible. But we know that's a possibility. Other names, another interesting one that's kind of in the same boat as Chris Beard, Jerome Tang, Kansas State. I know there's a real groundswell of support for Jerome Tang, longtime Baylor assistant, ironically enough, who, of course, 2 years at Kansas State. Year 1, they go to the Elite 8, Marquise Noel, all of that. This year, they're 18-13 entering the Big 12 tournament. And so what I think is interesting about Kansas State is, you know, I think Tang's a rock star. I do. Beats Kentucky in the NCAA tournament, beats Michigan State in the NCAA tournament. Great in the portal. That's what you need in this era. But I do think there are some fans that are going to say 2 years as a head coach, 1 Elite 8, 1 year where he's probably going to miss the NCAA tournament. And you look at that, and I think you can look at the Elite 8 and say the guy's awesome. But I think you could also look at the Elite 8, look at the NCAA tournament, or look at the missed tournament and say, okay, which one is the outlier? Is it the deep tournament run or the dude that doesn't even make the tournament? So it'll be interesting. Tang, I've mentioned it before, had some issues with his administration around Naquan Tomlin, who's now playing at Memphis. I think if the job was offered to him, he would take it. But I don't know where he stands in that pecking order. I actually think if they can't get Scott Drew, he might be number 2 on that list. Another guy that kind of falls in the Tang category, though not to that degree, Eric Musselman at Arkansas. Listen, I've obviously been a supporter of Coach Muss. I believe in what he's done. Another guy like Chris Beard that has won everywhere he's gone in college and won very quickly. Nevada, I believe it was a 16-win improvement in year 1 from 8 wins to 24 wins, if I'm not mistaken. Year 2 at Nevada. Remember, this is Nevada we're talking about. Make the NCAA tournament. Year 3 was that magical Sweet 16 run, and year 4 NCAA tournament. So you go to the NCAA tournament 3 out of 4 years at Nevada. you know what you're doing. Go to Arkansas, same thing. Year one's the COVID year. They're on the bubble. Their best player, Isaiah Joe, is hurt. But year two, Elite Eight. Year three, Elite Eight. Year four, Sweet 16. 3 out of those 4 years, you're in the second weekend of the tournament. That ain't bad. The problem, of course, and I've heard from people in Louisville, is that the issue is Arkansas is not very good this year. Finished 12th in the SEC, 15-16 overall. They have a major rebuild. And, listen, the tournament success speaks for itself. I also think it's a little harder to sell that coming off a 15-16 year. I will tell you from the Arkansas perspective, I think probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, they thought they were losing Coach Muss. I don't think they believe that they're losing him now, but the difference with Muss and some of these other guys, the buyout is very manageable. I think it's around $2 million a year, so you can get out of that pretty quickly. Now, a guy whose buyout you cannot get out of, it's our old buddy, Big Mick Energy, Mick Cronin over at UCLA. I've said this many times. I think about Mick Cronin. He actually signed a massive contract extension the last time the Louisville job was open 2 years ago. And he signed for a lot of money, but he also has a huge buyout. $20 million before April 1st, $16 million before April 1st, after April 1st of this year. So it's just, unless UCLA is willing to renegotiate his buyout, and I can't imagine why they would be, I don't know how you get him. You can't pay a $16 million buyout in the NIL era. I don't care what school you are. I don't care how much money you have. You can't pay a $16 million buyout to UCLA. You just can't. Unless you got one crazy booster that's willing to pay whatever. But it's just, you got to spend money on NIL. There's other programs. There's football. You can't spend that much money. And so I think if Mick Cronin had to do it again, I really would love to give Mick Cronin some truth serum and would love to say to him, dude, if you had to do it over, UCLA puts that contract on your desk 2 years ago. Would you have taken a little bit less money if it meant the buyout was a little lower? Something to think about. I can't see Mick Cronin being the next head coach, but I think those are your core candidates. Listen, there's the long shots. Billy Donovan's about to get fired probably again in the NBA. Is this the job that maybe he says with a month left in the NBA season, you're going to fire me? Just fire me now so I can take this job. Don't think it's going to happen. Don't think he's in a rush to get back to college basketball. Jay Wright, same thing. Jay Wright is not coming back for the Louisville job. I've said it before. I think the only job that Jay Wright potentially takes is if Villanova really flatlines and they have to get rid of Kyle Neptune. Then I could see Jay Wright taking that job. There's some other names out there. We'll save it for another time. But those are the candidates, I think, at Louisville. Kenny Payne is out. Cannot believe it. And by the way, we're going to talk about it more on tonight's show. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New videos going up every single day. Appreciate your support. And we're going to be covering this thing soup to nuts.